Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Onepeg. In today's video, we have a statement that was actually released by Terry, so the tinfoil hat theory worked. And secondly, the most important and even larger story here, the big one, is that there was an interview that was conducted about 5 days ago in Korea involving somebody that is a union representative for game developers that was very close to and works closely with a large number of Nexon employees that decided that he had some insight to share over the Ironmace and Dark and Darker situation. Good morning. My name again is Onepeg, and Terrence Park, CEO of Ironmace Games, said, "We truly hate not being able to communicate as freely as we usually do. However, due to the sensitive nature of our current situation, we can't divulge too much information right now. I know this isn't the announcement everyone wanted to hear, but we needed to let our fans know that early access release has been delayed a bit. Just know that we are working on a ton of things to ensure the game gets out to you as soon as possible. We ask everyone to hold the line just a little longer. Thanks." I don't think it's any surprise that early access got delayed. I mean, they're in the middle of a huge legal issue and legal battle, so, that's kind of a nothing burger. I think we figured that was going to happen. It's sad, it's unfortunate, but that's kind of par for the course, I think. But the main story here involves this guy. The guy on the right is middle-aged gamer Kim, and the guy on the left is a guy named Bae-Soo Chan. Now, Bae-Soo Chan is a union representative that's being interviewed by middle-aged gamer Kim, talking about all things related to Dark and Darker and the stuff that was going on internally with the employees. Now, I obviously don't speak Korean, and the live translation for this video didn't do so great. But lucky for us, we have a Reddit thread where somebody by the name of Solved with Beer ended up doing us the solid of recording a lot of notes about what this video was about. Now, I do want to say before we get into all of this, there is bias on all sides. There's going to be bias on the Nexon side of this fence, and there's going to be bias on the Ironmace side of this fence. I do my best, as much as I possibly can, to kind of stay in the middle. However, I will say that there seems to be an awful lot of bias in what is being said in this interview. And I believe that the motivation can be basically summarized in saying that this union rep wants to make sure that they have an open line of communication with the folks at Nexon as best as they possibly can. So in which case, they seem like they're kind of breaking one of the main tenets of being a union rep, and that is by going against the employee, which I see as being really weird. And perhaps Korea handles their union reps and union people that they're representing a little bit differently, but I digress. Tell us about the Dark and Darker situation. A lot has been reported through the media, so give us more insight. It's a lot worse than what's been reported through the media. It was rather weird that the company Nexon didn't take any action on this. Even as someone who represents the workers in Nexon, this was bad. So the former employee at Nexon, Mr. Choi, there were multiple wrongdoings this employee had done. Now, again, I find this to be really strange that they would openly admit that this person had done wrong when they don't actually have any proof of wrongdoing. But again, third hand, whatever, I digress. The first is spreading rumors to his team about Nexon abandoning P3 while still being paid. He had done this through internal team or individual meetings while being their boss. If he had done this after quitting, the problems would have never escalated to this level. The employee was actually one of the best directors the company had. His performance evaluation was by far the best from his peers, and the company was planning to give him bigger roles and make him a core employee of the company. So he was destined for greatness, apparently. But we'll get more to that in a minute. Also, P3 was actually going to be the very first project to be published through Mint Rocket, Nexon's subsidiary, instead of Dave the Diver. Mint Rocket is a subsidiary publishing company that Nexon had created in order to get people away from the Nexon name. They wanted games to be released through Mint Rocket as more of an indie developer project so that people didn't associate video game with Nexon because of the negative connotation that comes with them monetizing the shit out of everything. So it comes as such a bummer that he took this course of action. He really had no reason to spread rumors and quit Nexon. Simply put, he was far from getting fired, and his project P3 was not going to be canceled. And more on that in a second. The second problem is the employee had more of an ethical problem than a legal one. The most important part of a game project in its early stage in the direction and design of the game, it's not the source code, assets, etc. that are important. For instance, it takes only 3 to 4 days for me to make a replica of the game Baba Is You, but the original game is certainly not made within 3 to 4 days. It probably took months, if not years, of thinking and planning to design a great game like this. It's no different for Dark and Darker. The devs at Nexon took months, if not years, of planning to set the right direction for Project P3, So when half the team quit and decided to make a game that's almost the exact same direction and resemblance as P3 in such a short time frame, that came as a shock to a lot of people at Nexon, including the former teammates that ended up staying at Nexon. The third problem is the use of external servers. During the COVID era, some devs were allowed to export certain assets and codes to their external home servers if they were working remotely. After the remote work was no longer allowed, the management at Nexon gave clear orders to the devs to no longer use external servers, but this employee disregarded it under his own judgment and kept using the servers anyway. Now, in this case, again, I look at it as something like he was under a deadline and ended up making a bad choice. Now, Nexon says that that's stealing. In his case, he had permission. Now, they say that from like 2020 through June of 2021, he was stealing. But from the point in time that he began using his personal servers in 2020 until January of 21, he had permission. So it's really only the 6-month period of time between the 1st or 2nd of January and June of 2021, about the time when he was getting fired or he resigned. Whatever. We'll figure that out in a second too. In that period of time, he made a request in February to ask if he could. They said no. He turned the server off and then turned it back on in April. So there was like a 2-month gap where he wasn't using it and then turned them back on in April. And then from April to June, he was. Obviously, the question here would be, why would you do that? Was it that he was just stealing maliciously and wanted to take everything for himself and then disseminate that information out to either other personal computing devices of his or send them off to other server farms somewhere else or give them to friends so that they could like run through the code and start making up all kinds of other stuff? We have no idea. I would be more likely to believe that in large corporate America, you have deadlines. You end up having things that need to be met by a certain date for a certain amount of review so that a project could continue to be successful if it's going to be successful. In order to make those deadlines, sometimes you end up doing things like crunch, which is working damn near around the clock all day long, every day, 24 hours a day, if you can stay awake long enough to do it, to get a game completed. We've seen that happen multiple times across many, many, many AAA game dev studios where people are crunching for 3, 6, 8 months at a time, a year. You know, they just constantly go. So if somebody in the midst of COVID scares decides that the best way for them to do that is to not bother putting on a suit and whatever and going off to the actual office and just working at home, coding in their pajamas because, I don't know, maybe there's a short-term lockdown or something and they still have deadlines to make, that seems like a much more plausible scenario to me for somebody to turn on a personal server and work like that from home. According to Nexon and many other people that are watching this, something like that would still be considered stealing as long as they kept it. And we don't know if they did keep it. Maybe they did, or maybe they deleted everything, which leads us to the fourth one. When he was quitting Nexon, the company knew. Now, again, when he was quitting Nexon. So Mr. Choi says that he resigned. This union employee says that he resigned. Nexon says he was fired, which is an important distinction because that brings us to another point further down the line here. The company knew about his continued use of external servers and they asked him to bring the server in for an inspection. He did bring the server for an inspection, but only after degaussing the server. Now, this is interesting because this says when he was quitting Nexon. So, according to this, he quits. Then they say, give us your external server so that we can check it and make sure that there isn't any data on it. He says, okay, but he deleted everything. He also signed paperwork that said, you delete everything when you quit. If you leave employment, you have to remove all of the files associated with Nexon and your job here at Nexon off of all of your personal computing devices. So he did that. And according to them, because he did that, because that's the process that he was supposed to follow, because he did that, that is destruction of evidence because Nexon says that he was stealing information, but he was supposed to delete it all. So did he follow company process and policy, or did he steal things? We don't know. I guess that's up for a court to decide. Oh, wait, he's been in court for the last 2 years. Has there been a decision on that? No, there hasn't. He's only been not guilty this entire time. 2 years now, he's been in and out of court. Multiple lawsuits. They haven't found him guilty yet. Degaussing makes it impossible to recover data in electric equipment. This can easily be seen as destruction of evidence and can be used as an incriminating evidence in court. They've been trying that and still haven't found him guilty of it, but again, whatever. His reasoning behind this was that he had some personal info on the server, but I'm not sure if this is a strong enough reasoning. Normally, you don't keep personal stuff in servers. Again, I find this to be really weird narrative from a guy that is supposed to be a representative of people inside of his union. Like, that's a union that he represents. Why would you be bad-mouthing a guy when you're supposed to be a representative of somebody that worked and paid dues to your union? But again, whatever. Legally, a company can lay off people if they're struggling in the market. However, I've never seen someone actually get fired from a company in the gaming industry. Most of the times, the company asks or makes the employee resign on their own through various methods. This is usually done through severely limiting what employees can work on or telling them that the actions they can take if they don't resign. So it sounds as though Nexon forced a resignation on Mr. Choi instead of Mr. Choi actually being fired by Nexon. In which case, again, that's really shitty because that limits the amount of benefits that you get from the government or otherwise in, I don't know what Korea does, but in the United States, if you get terminated from employment, if somebody fires you, you can collect unemployment insurance. If they force a resignation on you, that is a completely different animal. If you quit your job, you don't get unemployment. One of the reasonings that you make for getting unemployment insurance is, why did you leave your job? And you say, well, I couldn't perform the duties of my job. I got terminated, right? Couldn't do what you were supposed to do. So then you can get unemployment insurance and other benefits. In the case of quitting, you get nothing. So forcing a resignation basically makes it so that Nexon isn't on the hook anymore, which is weird. As a labor union, even if I personally think that an employee is in the wrong, my job is to protect the employees, so I always try to come up with an argument for them, which is, again, really strange because he goes out of his way to mention how wrong he believes Mr. Choi was, but then talks about how he had to come up with an argument to back him up, but didn't really want to. In this case, the only argument that I could come up with was the poor management by the management team, which I don't think was a strong argument. Again, weird. In spite of this, Nexon actually punished the management team as well, and internally published the situation. Told everyone about how they punished the management team, which is really strange. But this didn't stop the employee from getting fired and sued, despite the aforementioned unlikelihood of someone getting fired in the gaming industry. So was he fired or was he quit? Because now he's contradicting himself, which is really weird. So maybe this was like a situation where he was going to quit. He said he was quitting and then they fired him anyway. I don't know. It's weird. Most people think that getting fired is the worst scenario as an employee, but there are worse cases. The company could take legal action against the employee or fire any other involved employees altogether. In this case, it would be half of the P3 team that decided to leave. So Nexon can either see them as accomplices and fire everyone or see them as victims and let them off the hook. Normally, it would be the former, but Nexon chose the latter and punished one person altogether. Even my labor union thought this was rather a soft action taken by Nexon. So what he's saying is because the 9 other guys that worked at Nexon that all left, none of them have had any legal action taken against them, even though they're all working at Ironmace now. It's only been Mr. Choi. They've only gone after Mr. Choi and no one else. Now, granted, there are lawsuits in the United States for trade secrets and DMCA, and those, by the way, are the only lawsuits against Ironmace anywhere. In Korea, Ironmace is not having a lawsuit pending. The only lawsuit that exists in the world against Ironmace as a company is in the United States. The only lawsuit that exists in the world against Terry Park is in the United States. And the only lawsuit in Korea that exists for anything related to Ironmace and Dark and Darker is against Mr. Choi, which I find to be odd because you would think that they would go after other people that were involved in this too, but they haven't at all. What happened to the rest of the team? After half the team left, the ones who stayed at Nexon chose between continuing the project or moving to a whole new project, but they ended up moving to a new project instead. After that, Dark and Darker was released, and now Nexon has sued Ironmace, as we all know. Again, only in the United States. First thought, it's really, really weird for a representative of a labor union that represents game developers to speak out against another game developer inside of the industry that used to be or is still a member of your union. At one point, when you represented them and you towed the line and you are now no longer doing that, reeks as though you are trying to save face in a way that would allow you to continue to work with or have a decent working relationship with Nexon as a corporate entity. That seems really, really strange to me, and automatically I have red flags going off like crazy. I have never once in my entire life seen a union representative say something bad about a union member ever, or even a former union member, even somebody that doesn't pay dues anymore. You would never catch a union rep dead talking negatively about anyone that was ever a member of their union. It's just something that you don't do. It weakens the position of the union instantly and suddenly ruins any credibility or trustworthiness that you at one time had for your own union. If I do something wrong, my union rep is going to turn tail on me the moment that I end up in trouble. That would be the worst possible thing that you could do as a union rep. That seems so weird to me. Maybe it's different in Korea, I don't know, but that seems so strange. Secondly, I have been following this case from the very beginning. I believe I was the first media person to do anything in the English language about this at all. That being said, since I've been following this from the beginning, the one question I have always had in my head about this entire case and the reasons for Mr. Choi leaving and starting Ironmace with Terry and all this other stuff is why? Why would they do that? It doesn't make any sense. Consider you're a veteran game developer, 15, 20-year-long running game dev, somebody that in Terry Park's case was involved with the creation of the loot box. And I'm not even joking. He was in the room when they were talking about whether or not the loot box was even legal to do, has been working with game devs by and large. Mr. Choi, somebody that's celebrated inside of Nexon, according to Nexon, someone that was being groomed, tracked for a C-level executive position, let's say, somebody that was going to be one of the higher ups at Nexon Corporate one day, highly regarded, highly reviewed, decorated employee, somebody that was loved by all. In this massive shock, we can't believe that this happened. How could he possibly do this? Benedict Arnold, Brutus, et tu Brute, how could you? Why would Mr. Choi, having a good paying job, working in a solid established game dev studio with the ability to directorially come up with a game that he wanted to make, why would he be in that position under prospect of leaving his job, being at the very least blackballed from any potential game dev position in the whole of Korea, at the very least ever again for his entire working life? Why would he do that to start a fledgling game dev studio using information from a prior studio with no money, nothing to show for it, knowing full well that he'd likely end up under legal scrutiny, having people sue him? That is insane. That is absolute insanity. Who would do you must have an absolute screw loose. You must be crazy. There's no way that greed is that important to where you would risk it all to make a carbon copy game. It's just it's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. Unless, of course, the company that you're working for has serious problems. They're treating you like shit. They're not paying you hardly anything. And your project was being ripped up, torn apart, and likely was never going to see the light of day. Because Nexon talks about how Mr. Choi internally was telling people, recruiting people, saying that the game was going to fail. Directors were telling him that the game was going to be archived, that people were going to lose their project and that they were going to be moved elsewhere. That's what he was telling other people, that the project was failing. I don't think it's outlandish to think that he was recruiting from within. I think that probably happened. That seems like a plausible scenario to me. But again, the question is why? If the project was being tracked, destined for success, like Nexon says, why then would they all quit? Surely the undermining couldn't have been that severe. One person is not going to undermine the developmental progress of a video game so severely that the game would be completely failed, let's say. This, of course, is on the outside of the argument for the game dev industry as a whole surrounding mistreatment of programmers and things like crunch, which are notorious for AAA game studios around the world because people want to get their projects out by a certain day at a certain time, right? Also consider that Nexon has said all along that this game was destined for success. In their own statement, they say the only reason why Ironmace Games in Dark and Darker is even remotely successful is because it was already going to be deemed a success, or was already deemed a success, by Nexon. Nexon being the rubric by which whether games are going to be successful or not. Of course, we don't know whether or not that's actually true. And considering that Nexon decided after this 10-employee group decided to leave, after Nexon decided that it was no longer going to produce or pursue this project, because according to Nexon, when these 10 people left, it kind of crippled the production ability of the game, they didn't think to themselves that they could hire another 10 or 12 devs and continue the work on this game instead. Nexon fired Mr. Choi in August of 2021, July, actually, of 2021, and Ironmace Games was started in October of 2021, meaning that it was almost a calendar year before they had a early access-ish playtest product that they put out on banner ads in September, August of 2022. So you had a year where you could have found new devs, and even now that we're in May, granted with the lawsuit and all this stuff, things have been slowed down, of course, But now that we're in May, they still don't have a marketable product. They haven't taken a penny from anyone. They've only eaten out of their own wallets to be able to serve the game for everybody to be able to play it. So where's the product? In a year and a half, you're telling me that Nexon, with its greenlit situation, couldn't have pulled in another 10 to 12 devs and made a product and gotten it out to market faster than Ironmace Games could have? That seems a little bit strange to me. Because if you had a marketable product, if you had something that you had actually been charging money for, you maybe then could go after Ironmace and say that this is a carbon copy because here's our marketed product right here. But instead, it didn't go that way, and it got archived. And then they came out and said that Ironmace was stealing from them. Seems like it's an awful easy position to claim that something like that was going on when you don't have anything to really market to the masses, especially after you see a game like Ironmace's end up being a relative success, at least in player statistics anyway. On Ironmace's own website, they tend to thumb their nose directly at Nexon, talking about how they're trying to make a game that isn't synonymous with corporate greed. Especially considering the context of what we have going on now, it seems as though they're directly talking to Nexon when it comes to their own mission statement on their webpage. So if you ask me, the reasons why Ironmace is making the game that they're making and how they're making it is because they don't like the idea of Nexon and its monetization schemes. If we extrapolate from that a little bit, it wouldn't be a stretch of the imagination to assume that there were closed-door meetings between SDF and the uppers over at Nexon about how they were going to best monetize Dark and Darker, likely coming to the conclusion that the monetization avenues and angles were likely not as abundant as what the, I guess, corporate entity of Nexon would have liked, and they were probably trying to force SDF into making additional angles for them to make even more money, if they possibly could. That pushback was likely the thing that made SDF as stressed as he was about it and ultimately led to the decision to quit. To me, it seems as though Nexon ended up having a large internal fight with its own development team about how to best monetize the game, where the development team tried to push back on that narrative, saying that that's not how this game should be made. Players don't want that kind of stuff anymore. You will be more profitable if you don't do that. And Nexon decided to, I guess, stick to its ways. That idea of not being able to adequately monetize the game would also be the catalyst for a company like Nexon to abandon a project like that, where the initial devs of the project that really wanted it to see the light of day decided that they were leaving and they were going to take their project with them. Of course, then comes the legality of the whole thing and whether or not they could actually do that, even if it was just from memory and they don't actually have any of the source code to work from. So the question would be, if Nexon were to throw it into the archive, if they were going to go for a monetization angle and couldn't find the angles that they needed, would it then be okay to take that memory of what it was that the company at one time had thrown away and make it yourself? Or is that something that Nexon still gets to claim ownership over? Can they claim ownership over it? I guess that's what we'll have to figure out in U.S. court, right? Anyway, guys, thanks for coming by. For more news and information around survival and shooting games, especially games like this one, please consider subbing the channel. It really, really does matter. Thank you all for watching this video. I really, really genuinely appreciate it. I love you all. Please come by and check me out at twitch.tv/Onepeg, where I stream every day around 7 to 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time most days. Hopefully we'll see you there. Come by and say hi. Would love to see y'all, and we'll see you in the next video, okay? Peace.